I come from a long line of immigrants. My great-grandfather left France and traveled to Lebanon, fleeing poverty. My grandfather left Lebanon and went to Cuba, fleeing war. My father left Cuba and came to the United States, fleeing revolution. I'm 31 years old right now, and I wonder if I had to leave this country for war or famine or revolution, would I do as well as my father or my grandfather or my great-grandfather? Cuando mi papá vino de Cuba, él no hablaba inglés, solamente español. Levanta la mano si habla español, por favor. If you understood me, you speak Spanish. He met a woman here who didn't speak any Spanish at all. She only spoke English. Raise your hand if you speak English, please. Well, that man who spoke no English and that woman who spoke no Spanish, they did the natural thing. They got married. And they had me. And I grew up speaking Spanish with my dad and English with my mom. I was born on September 23rd, 1968. My first birthday, September 23rd, 1969, my mom was in the hospital giving birth to twin boys. My dad will say, 3 months in 1 year, that's the man that I am, you know. And we were a handful for my mom, and as is typical with many Cuban families, my grandmother Mimi moved in to live with us. And even that wasn't enough, so her older sister Nina moved in to live with us. And my earliest memories are of these women, and because of them, my first language was Spanish. They sang me songs in Spanish, songs that I've long since forgotten. It was Mimi who gave me my nickname, Papito, typically given to the oldest-born Cuban male. When we got out of diapers and started walking around and talking, Mimi and Nina moved back to Miami, Florida's Little Havana, where they lived until they died. And we were in Delaware, just my dad and my mom and my 2 brothers and I. My first day of kindergarten, I was so excited to get to school that I got the whole house up at 5:30 in the morning. Couldn't wait to go to school. Finally, 7:30 rolled around, and my dad walked me down the street. And I said, I want to enter the school by myself. Papa, yo quiero entrar solo, okay? He said, okay, papito, adios. I said, adios, papa. I walked into the school, and when I got to my classroom, I was so excited. I threw open the door. There was my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Green, La Señora Verde. And she was so sweet. She had mobiles dangling from the ceiling, pictures on the walls. There was a little beanbag chair. We had a sandbox inside the room. I was so excited when I saw all of that I forgot to speak in English. I said, hola, ¿cómo están toda la gente aquí? Yo me llamo Papito. They looked at me, they said, what? I said, hola, me llamo Papito. And Mrs. Green said, oh, honey, nobody speaks Spanish here. We only speak English. Oh, well, that's okay. I speak English too. Hi, everybody. My name is Papito. And one little boy in the back of the room stood up. He looked at me. He said, Papito? Sounds like Dorito. I said, no, it's Papito. He said, no, it's Dorito. All day long, he called me Dorito. The next day at school, the kid said, hey, it's Nacho Cheesehead. And they called me Tostito and Burrito, and one kid kept calling me Potato. Now, if you don't speak Spanish, listen closely, you may figure it out. I went home that day and I said to my dad, I said, Papá, ahora yo no me llamo Papito. Mi papá me dijo, ¿por qué no? Tú te llamas Papito. Yo dije, no, ahora me llamo, y pensé en un nombre más americano. Yo dije, ahora me llamo Tony. Mi papá me dijo, ¿Tony? Yo dije, sí, Tony. Él dijo, okay, which is Spanish for okay. The next day when he dropped me off at school, he said, hasta luego, papito. Tony, adios. I said, okay, papa, adios. And one of the kids in the playground heard my dad and I speaking Spanish. As my dad walked away, he came up to me. He was a big 3rd grader. He said, hey. I said, yeah? What was that you were speaking? Spanish. Sounds stupid. Are you stupid? Die. And he went and told the whole school that I was stupid, and even I believed him. And I went home and I did what so many children of immigrants do to their parents to this day. I told my dad I never wanted to speak his language again. And if he spoke to me in Spanish, si me habló en español, I'd answer back in English. And after a while, if he spoke to me in Spanish, I pretended like I didn't understand him until he only spoke to me in English. Then my parents got divorced when I was 8, and my dad moved out. I only saw him once a week. And I had no one to practice Spanish with if I wanted to. But I didn't want to because my mom spoke English, everyone at school spoke English. I thought, why would I need Spanish again anyway? And little by little, my first language slipped away. Around this time, my mom took us to our big Boston Irish clan, and I would get in touch with all the cousins. There was 15 cousins, 5 uncles and aunts, 2 grandparents, 2 great-grandparents. And around this time, we would go to school with little shamrocks on our sweaters. And one St. Patrick's Day, the teacher looked at me and took the shamrock off, and she said, "Oh, honey, you're not Irish, you're Hispanic." In 1979, 1980, there was problems in Cuba that I didn't know about. I learned it years later. It seems that there's a bunch of people speaking out against Fidel Castro's government. And instead of throwing them in jail or running them over in tanks, what Castro did is said to those people, "If you don't like it, you can leave. I'll even give you a free ride." And about 50,000 Cubans signed up, got in boats, and most of them came to the United States. Now, as a little jab at the States, Castro threw in a few of his worst criminals. And what happened was all those Cubans that came over got a bad name. And they made that movie with Al Pacino in Scarface. Remember that movie? Say hello to my little friend, And all this was going on, and I knew none of it as I was entering high school. 1982 was my first year of high school. And the first class that I remember was American history class. And the teacher read the roll call. Antonio Bernardo Sacre. Who's that? Please call me Tony. Antonio Bernardo Sacre. What kind of a name is that? And I said, "It's Cuban." And the whole class turned and looked at me. And I said, "I'm not Cuban. My father, he's Cuban. Me, I'm American." He said, "Oh, well, where's your mother from?" I said, "Well, she's American too, but she's Irish-American." He said, "Cuban and Irish? What kind of a combination is that?" And the whole class laughed because he was a funny guy. That day at lunch, Jay Murphy, he looked at me and he said, "So you're Cuban and Irish, huh? I guess that makes you a spick-mick, or maybe a mix-pick." And the whole table laughed because Jay Murphy was a funny guy.